Well, good morning. Good to see you all out there. We've kind of got the summer crowds here, so we're a little more sparse, but that's okay. It's great to see you guys here. I'm sure we'll all be in and out a little bit over the summer, but it's really wonderful to see you guys every week. Hey, right before I kick into the sermon today, I want to just, from the pulpit, put what's already been put before you in the announcement, just so now I know you're all paying attention. Usually none of you have started sleeping yet, but commitments in some areas and kind of pitching to them. But if you are interested in that at all, or you just kind of want to meet some of the people there who would ask you, just show up, meet some people, listen. There's going to be some food. It's not going to be too long. We'll get you out of there in about 45 minutes, an hour, and it's free pizza, so that's something. But hey, if you're looking for a place where you can serve and just seriously make a gigantic impact on the life of a child, while you work with some other people, please go and just hear about it. We constantly have need. It's the biggest kind of volunteer need we really need week after week on a Sunday morning. And so that's why we're kind of constantly putting it before you guys. I'm telling you, there's no bigger thing that will fill your heart up with joy, and also you can just see the tangible impact you make right before you every single week. I would ask you to maybe just show up for that, even if you haven't signed up for anything, and just meet some people. Hey, go ahead and turn in your Bibles to the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth, and if you don't have a physical Bible in front of you, maybe pull it up on your phone. We're going to try to go through most of the book. We're going to go through all of the book today, reading a good chunk of it. So it helps to just have the text in front of you as we go through. But to start, I want to maybe bring to your attention, for some of you, maybe for the first time, for some of you, maybe for the 100th time, a very powerful scene in cinema and literature, and it's from The Lord of the Rings, from the first book, The Fellowship of the Ring. And it's this moment where the ring of power has come into view, and something needs to be done with it. And so everybody gathers in this elven palace at Rivendell, where the high elven leader Elrond has called together the greatest and best men from all of the races of the world, the greatest warriors. And he said, from among you will be one who brings the ring to the fires of Mount Doom to destroy it. And it's the only way that we're going to have victory over this enemy that we've been fighting for so many years. And so you see these great commitments from these mighty warriors. They say, I will give my sword to the task. And another says, I will give my bow. And then the dwarf, who's my favorite, Gimli, he said, and my axe. And he puts it down, and he kind of looks at the elf like, what's your bow to my axe type of thing. And you see kind of one of them is a king, and he said, or a king to be, and he says, I will also give my service. But when it comes to the one who will actually carry the ring of power, the ring that has this power to corrupt people, none of them actually stand up and offer themselves as the one who will bear the ring. They will gladly give their strength and their might in battle to defend the ring bearer, but none of them, when it comes to the point where they say, who's going to bear the ring, all of them kind of sit back. And it's finally the little, kind of overlooked, insignificant hobbit who's half the size of all the others. He comes from a simple little place, the Shire, that the world kind of tends to look over, and the Shire just stays disconnected from the rest of the world. They're a little insignificant people in the grand scheme of events. And he steps up and he says, I'll take the ring. And then sheepishly kind of says, but I don't know the way. And it's a very kind of simple but also quaint depiction of someone just so small and insignificant that everyone had looked over, stepping into that central place of utter significance. And it's what the entire story hinges on, is that moment where he says, I will take the ring. And when I was looking for a title for the book of Ruth, I titled this one, God's Heart for the Insignificant. Don't see insignificant as an actual statement of who Ruth is, but see the quotes around it. The insignificant, one who at first seems insignificant. One who, she's a woman in the Middle East. She's a foreigner at that. She's poor. She's a widow. She's just kind of a very lowly, off to the side type of person in the communities of that day. One who even the text will seem to present as the community about her seeing as insignificant, unnoticed, not much going on there. And the story of Ruth is how God will take someone who the world might see as insignificant and can do wondrous and miraculous things through them and put them as someone who is utterly significant in the entire history of the world. In that scene, Elrond says when the hobbits step forward and they know that the hobbits are going to be the ones who kind of change the fate of the world, if it changes at all, he says, well, this quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong, right? The weak and the strong have just as much hope, I guess, in this task. Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. The deeds that move the wheels of the world, oftentimes it's the small hands that do those deeds because the eyes of the great are elsewhere. I think we see that in the story of Ruth. Small hands, simple acts, but it moves the wheels of the entire world, and it's significant. One of the most significant events in Israeli history and Jewish history, and also one of the most significant events in Christian history. And we're going to see that as we go forward. So, real quick as a recap, in the summer we're looking at God's missional heart, or God's heart to seek and redeem people and bring them to himself for their great joy and his immense glory. That's the heart of God. That's the reason he created the world, is because he was resplendent in glory and perfect goodness, and he wanted to share that with more people. And so he creates the world, and he creates a people who both have the ability to see his glory and recognize it, and then worship it truly, to step into the praise, the love of that glory, to enjoy it. And he says, that is my way of bringing people to myself and sharing my perfect goodness with people. And so we're seeing, how does God go on mission to seek people who are stuck in a false worship? They're worshiping things that don't bring them joy and satisfaction. Instead, they worship and give themselves to things that will destroy them and hurt them and enslave them and leave them unsatisfied all at the same time. I want to deliver people from that to a true worship where they see and recognize my goodness and glory and rejoice in that for all of eternity. It's what Jonathan Edwards calls the end for which God created the world. The end for which God created the world. And so we're seeing, as we go through Scripture, simple little stories and vignettes of the Lord kind of seeking different people from different backgrounds, people that maybe you wouldn't expect at first, and seeing what happens when the Lord pursues and redeems someone and brings them into the people of God. And Ruth is just one of those stories that we're going to look at. So let's go Ruth 1. It says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. I'll stop right there. I'm not going to stop this frequently all throughout, all right? Hold on. In the days when the judges ruled. It's really important because it gives us a setting for this entire letter. The days of the judges was this day between when God had given Israel the law. He said, I've revealed myself to you and I've shown you how you are to live, but it's before the Davidic monarchy was established, or the monarchy at all. And really it's a time of people trying to figure out who they are as a people and what it actually means to be the people of God and to follow the law faithfully. They're kind of trying to figure it out, and they're not doing a very good job. The entire book of Judges is a roller coaster. It just goes like this. And this is people are faithful to the Lord, and then people are unfaithful to the Lord, and they get captured by an enemy. And so they turn in repentance. He sends a judge to deliver them. That's what the judge is. And they're faithful to the Lord for a reason. Then they go back down and up and down and up and down. And it's an interesting time. I want to kind of describe it as the Wild West of Israel's history. It's the Wild West of Israel's history where they don't quite have a national identity that matters in their day-to-day life a lot. I mean, it matters, but it's not in their day-to-day interactions. It's more tribally focused. And just kind of like in the Wild West, it was kind of the politics of the local area that determined what the law and order was in that place, more than the whole federal government overreach. In the same way here, it's more so local dynamics that lead things, and it's almost the Wild West of these days. So what you're going to see is people not living up to the ideal in this letter and seeing how God works in that broken situation to still bring goodness and glory and to still bless people in a tremendous way. So it's the days when the judges ruled. And it said there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, so it's an Israelite, he went to sojourn in the country of Moab. That's a foreign country. He and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem and Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives, and the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. That's how long they were gone out of the land of Israel. And then both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Now that should be a moment, if we were Israelites reading this for the first time, it'd be a gasp moment in that original day, right? Like, oh no. Right? Because to be left without your husband and your sons is to be left without the main avenue by which you would find provision and protection in that society. For in that day and age, it was the men who could own land. It was the men who did business. It was the men whose line kind of continued their genealogy, all of that, right? And so for women to not have a husband or sons, they were kind of in a desperate place. And not only is it Naomi, and she's in a foreign land, but it's also 2 daughters-in-law who now also don't have husbands. So for the rest of the next, let's see if I can count this real quick. About 10 verses, 11 verses, Naomi's going to try to convince her daughter-in-laws, listen, we're not in a good situation. I have no clue how we're going to make it. You need to go back to your own people. Go back to your family. Go back and find husbands from your own people. This is the only way you're going to make it. You need to go back. She says it 3 times to both of them, and then Ruth decides, no, I'm going to stick around after Orpah decides to leave, and she says it again to Ruth. Listen, you need to return. And Ruth kind of takes a defiant stance. She says, no, I'm going with you. She says it like this in verse 16. She says, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh, the Lord, do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. That's okay. We get it, Ruth. You're coming. Right? But we need to kind of see that as very surprising. Very surprising in that day and age. It was a very risky move. But she thought it was her duty to her mother-in-law to go with her and to stick with her. We pick up in verse 19. So the 2 of them decide to go to Bethlehem. They heard that the famine had let up. The Lord had provided food, so they're going back to Bethlehem. They came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred. So we see a small town here. Everybody notices when they come back. And the women said, is this Naomi? And she said to them, do not call me Naomi, which means pleasant, but instead call me Mara, which means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So we see Naomi here, when she comes back to Bethlehem, she considers herself empty and bitter because the Lord has dealt bitterly with her and he's taken everything away from her. And I want to maybe just start here by saying, maybe there's someone here who feels like they're in a stage like that right now with your walk in the Lord. You feel like, man, he's just dealt bitterly with me. I feel empty, like the Lord is far away, like he's forgotten me. And if I'm honest, I'm a little bit bitter. I want you to know the Bible doesn't avoid that reality for the people of God. It doesn't brush over it and say, this never happens if you're truly a Christian or if you're truly following the Lord. Your lives are perfect if you do that. It never says that. Often in the Bible, we see people who are going through real trials, and the Lord seems far away, and they're wrestling with their faith. It's a moment of what I might say, the word disorientation. You ever been disoriented where you're just kind of like, you're knocked off balance and you have no firm grounding under your feet, and maybe you stay in a season like that? Like, you thought God was this and this and this. You thought that this is what his promises were and his assurances were, and it doesn't seem like your situations are lining up with that, and you're disoriented because you're not quite sure where you stand, and the ground just seems unsteady under your feet. That's the situation we see Naomi in. And if you're in a situation like that, I'd say, hold on, and let's see what the Lord does in Naomi's life, and let's see what we can learn from the journey she takes in this letter. The chapter says, at the end, it says, Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And then it says this, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Well, that's important, but it's an interesting little fact. They just so happened to come at the beginning of barley harvest. Chapter 2. It says, now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. So Ruth is going out to glean. What does that mean? Gleaning was something that was a provision put in by God for his people, for those specifically who had fallen on hard times or who were poor. And so what would happen is when people came and harvested a field, they were not supposed to get every single thing that they possibly could get, even if it wasn't a very good ear of corn or a bushel of barley. I don't know what barley looks like, so I should have done some research on that. But they aren't supposed to just strip it clean. They're supposed to get most of it, but leave some behind so that the poor in the land could come after they've harvested a field, and they could start gathering from the provisions, and they could provide for their families. Now, they couldn't go and sell that, and they couldn't do business with it the way that other people were, but they could at least have the food and provision for her family. So this is what Ruth is doing. And what we're supposed to recognize here is that this is first a dangerous situation, and also it's a situation that really reveals the failure of the community about them. First, a dangerous situation. Ruth is a single woman going out to a field far away from the greater community and out of the city center, and she's around other desperate people likely. And in that day and age, especially women being seen as more second-class citizens, again, not the ideal, not how God presented it, but how it was often. She could be taken advantage of by the workers. She could be taken advantage of by other people after she'd worked hard all day under the hot sun, maybe with no water around. She could have all that stolen from her, from someone who's stronger. It's a dangerous situation. She puts her life on the line to go out here to try to provide for her and Naomi. It's quite a sacrificial move and a dangerous move. The other thing is there's a big failure of the community that we see here, because when they came back, Naomi had greater family, and the community about her, the clan of Elimelech, that was her husband, should have taken them in and taken care of her. And I don't know if it's because Ruth was with her, and Ruth was a Moabite, a foreigner, which the Israelis did not like, for good reason, honestly, in the law. The Moabites didn't treat the Israelis very well either. A lot of tension there. Or I think they were widows and they were poor and people just didn't care. They were caught up in their own life. That almost seems to be the way it's presented. Big failure of the community is what we see here. So it goes on. It said, as she's gleaning, what verse am I in? Verse 3. So she set out and she went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Okay, that's convenient. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. Well, that's also convenient. And he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, now whose young woman is this? He happens to see Ruth when he went out. And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and says, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she's continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So she's working hard. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in another field or leave this one. Why don't you stay in this field? Don't go to another one. And then he says, but keep close to my young women, and let your eyes be on this field that you're reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. So you see some of what I was talking about here. He said, listen, you need to stay close to these women, and you need to stay in this field. This is where you're going to be safe. And by the way, I've said to all of my men, you make sure not to touch that woman. So Boaz steps in, and he makes sure that she's protected. And then he also makes sure that she's provided for, and that he says, feel free to come by and drink the water that the workers are drinking as well. Don't let them act like you're not worthy to come up to that. So we see God, through Boaz, providing protection and provision for Ruth here. And what she says in verse 10, she fell on her face, bowing to the ground. She's surprised by this. She says, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? So this is surprising. I'm a foreigner. You shouldn't be responding this way to me. But Boaz says, well, it's because I've heard of what you've done for your mother-in-law. He says in verse 12, he says, so because of this kindness that you've shown to your mother-in-law, he says, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Under whose wings you've come to take refuge. Remember that line is going to be important in chapter 3. And so he also, what the rest of this chapter has is he brings her in when they start having a meal, and he says, why don't you come and actually eat with us? And then he'll say to his reapers, you know what? Leave out some extra food for her. Even after you've plucked it, just make sure she gets a lot of the good stuff that she can bring it home. So she goes home and she shows her mom, and her mother-in-law is like, whoa, where did you glean today? And she said, well, I was in Boaz's field. And she says this in verse 19. She said, blessed be the man who took notice of you. And Ruth told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I worked is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. So this is an interesting little line. We need to know what she has in mind here. A redeemer is one that in that day, there was this idea that if the men in a family died, the widow was supposed to be taken care of in a couple different ways. If she was older and kind of past marrying age, then whatever land the man owned was supposed to be purchased by the family to keep it in the family name, and the provisions were supposed to go to the widow so that she can have some money and provide for herself, but also have a community of people with whom she's around. The second thing is that they were supposed to protect and provide for them just as a family were. The third is that if they were of marrying age, there should be a brother or a cousin in the family who would actually marry the widow. And the idea is that the first child that came from that line would be a perpetuation of the man who had died. So to kind of keep a family line from dying out in the people of Israel, and to keep land from being kind of frittered away and stolen or sold off because of bad hardship. They wanted communities to stay sound, and then widows to be taken care of. Come in, you'll be a husband. That's where you'll find that family and that community, and the Lord's provision of a child will be as if he is continuing the name of your husband. So those three things are in view. You'll see how it comes up later in the letter. But this is what Naomi kind of has in her mind, like, oh, a future husband. And she says it so like a mother-in-law would, right? Did you guys catch that? Ruth is in the middle of telling the story, like, yeah, I'm smoked, exhausted. Here's where I was. Yeah, like this guy. And she's like, oh, Boaz, he is one of our redeemers. And, and just kind of like throws that out there, like, just saying. And Ruth is just like, yeah, okay. Verse 21, she says, anyway, besides, he said to me, I'm in the middle of my story, you shall keep close to my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted, right? She's owning that fact of it was dangerous, and they were in desperate place when this happened. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz as she gleaned until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Now, what we're supposed to see there, the barley and the wheat harvest, is about a month and a half, 6 or 7 weeks, that Ruth is going back and forth day after day, gleaning in these fields. So that's what we have with chapter 2. Let's go into chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. That is, he ate a lot and he probably got a little drunk. And then he went down to sleep by his produce so that it didn't get stolen. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. It's kind of funny. He said, who are you? And she said, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Stop there. We need to be keyed into what's happening in the text here. Not only in our day and age does this seem a little edgy and scandalous, like, oh, okay, what's going on here? The feet uncovering at the threshing floor, right? Like, that sounds like something on the Lifetime channel, right? Well, not only does it sound like that to us, in that day and age, it also sounded like that. And also, there's specific language in this text that's actually has a sexual connotation to it. So it kind of gives a little more of an intuition, or an intimation of that. When she says, it's most obvious when she says, spread your wings over your servant. The other way that can be translated is to spread your robe over your servant, which can be a sexual connotation there. And so we're kind of saying, at this point in the book, we're like, whoa, what is going on? This seems out of character. This doesn't seem right. So we're supposed to say, this could be disastrous on so many fronts. And that's what we're supposed to see at this point. Oh my gosh, there's disaster coming. Because Boaz has been presented as this virtuous, worthy man, was the language I said in chapter 2. And so if there is kind of this propositioning happening here, the expectation is that he'll cast her out and he'll say, absolutely not, and then she'll lose all of her protection and provision. If he's not as virtuous as a man as it seems that he's been, and especially since he's a little drunk, then maybe he takes advantage of Ruth here. He misunderstands her. And it would probably ruin both their reputations, but in that day and age, it would definitely ruin Ruth's. She'd be considered a prostitute, a harlot. She could be stoned for this, if that were to happen. The other thing that can happen is, if everything is above board, and they both understand together that we're not, this isn't what's in view here, this untoward action isn't what's in view here, so everything's good there, but someone were to perceive this happening and not be keyed into the conversation, they could then go out and tell the story and sully the name of Ruth, which would then ruin any opportunity of her getting married and being respected in the community and having any provision for both her and her mother-in-law. Really, every scenario you can think of, you're like, yikes, this is a gamble. Let's see what happens. Boaz said in verse 10, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer that is nearer than I," so someone who has the rights above Boaz. He says, "Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." This is Boaz owning the fact that we have an understanding about us, but don't let anyone else know about this because they don't understand, right? And then he gives her a bunch of food and sends her home to her mother-in-law, like a ton of food, like as much as she could possibly carry, right? And he said, "Your mother-in-law needs to know that I'm going to provide for you guys." And that's what was in that action. So here's what we see. I think we can safely assume that something inappropriate didn't go on here. I think there are a few indications in the text. First of all, Boaz is presented as, like I said, this worthy, virtuous man all throughout the letter, and he's going to be so, or presented that way in chapter 4 as well. It would be really inconsistent if he was the kind of guy who would take advantage of a situation like this. Also in his response, the first thing he says to Ruth is he draws attention to her worthiness, and in fact, he uses the covenant name of Yahweh to bring a blessing upon her for her taking this action. He knows it was a risky thing. Also, I think there are a few indications. It specifically says a few times that she lay at his feet. I think that's intentional to show what was the position of the peoples here involved, and that's a pretty safe situation there. If you're laying at someone's feet, that's not a very exciting situation, right? Especially after they've worked all day and drunk all night. So anyway, I think that takes some of the passion out of the narrative, if you will. But here's what he says. He says, "I see what you're doing. You're asking me to be a redeemer. You're asking me to take you and your mother under my wings." And what do we have as our main kind of understanding for how that should be interpreted? Chapter 2, where Boaz says, "May the Lord bring you under his wings and protect you." And what Boaz is saying, I will be Yahweh's representative or Yahweh's instrument to bring you into provision and protection. And he says this last kindness is even better than the first. What's he have in mind there? The first kindness was the fact that Ruth stayed with her mother-in-law, and she did the risky, hard work of providing for her mother-in-law when no one else in the community would. So he says, you're doing that now. However, by seeking me as a redeemer, when you could have gone and found another husband, you're not just providing for yourself in the future, but you're specifically doing something that will provide for your mother-in-law as well. Your mother-in-law, not only in the here and now, food provision, but also in the long term by grandsons who will carry on the name of her deceased husband and children. And he says, what a kindness. And he presents it as if Ruth is giving this self-sacrificial thing. He said, you could have found a much better husband than me. He said, I am old. There are lots of younger guys out there. I'm not very exciting, right? That's the way he kind of presents it. He's like, how kind you are to give up your own possibilities for the sake of your mother and the sake of making sure that she is taken care of, not just now, but going forward as well. And then also that she would regain her kind of presence back in the community, her respect in the community from this. So that's what happens at the end of chapter 3. A couple things here. In chapter 1 and 2, Ruth was mentioned as the Moabite 4 times, and then she mentioned herself as a foreigner once. And there's a big focus on the fact that Ruth the Moabite, the Moabite, the Moabite. In chapter 3, the word Moabite and Ruth as a Moabite does not come up at all, indicating that Boaz didn't primarily see her as a foreigner. He primarily saw her virtuous spirit and her godliness, and that is what he saw in Ruth and what he honored in her. The other thing is, at the end of chapter 3, we kind of are keyed into the fact that this whole letter is hinged on a lot of comings and goings, right? Comings and goings. They went to Moab, and then they had to come back from Moab. And then Ruth went to the field, and then she came back from the field. All of this is in the language of the text. And then she went to the threshing floor, and she came back from the threshing floor. And Boaz is going to go to the city gates and come back from the city gates. And all this coming and going, coming and going. What we see here is this journey that these women are on, this journey of trusting in the Lord and only seeing how he will provide in tough situations. It reminds me of Psalm 121. I think it's an appropriate psalm for this letter. The psalmist says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? Well, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. I need help. I just have to look up to the Lord. He says, he will not let your foot be moved, right? He'll keep your feet steady. He'll put a firm rock under your feet. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. He won't stop taking care of you. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. That is, the Lord will protect you and provide for you 24/7. And then it says this, the Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. And haven't you seen him do that in the life of Ruth to this point in the letter? Man, her life was on the line a number of times. He kept her from evil coming against her. He kept her life. And then it says this, the Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. He'll keep your going out and your coming in. You see, I started by kind of saying maybe there's some people here who are in a season of disorientation. And what we see from these women is not that the Lord reoriented them, that is, put them back to the situation before the struggle happened. And that's so often what we want, isn't it? We want it to be as if the hardship never happened, or as if these things never happened. We want the Lord to just take us out of the situation. Just fix it, right, Lord? Just fix it. And the Lord said, yes, I know that you're disoriented, and I know that the waves are crashing over you, and it's tough to get your footing, it's tough to breathe. But what he presents us is this journey, a going and coming. Keep going out, keep coming in, day after day. Keep doing what's ahead of you, and trust in me. Look to me. I will keep you. It might hurt, it might be tough, it might be risky, but I will keep you if you trust in me. And we see Naomi and Ruth, they had to take the journey, didn't they, to find orientation. We're going to see how it turns out for them. But what we see is the Lord doesn't necessarily reorient us, right? He doesn't return us to the status quo that happened before the tragedy came. He takes us through the tragedy until eventually we have solid ground under our feet again, and it's a new orientation. We're oriented, we're steady, we're solid, but it's a newness. There's something new about ourselves that we know. There's something new about God that we learn. There maybe are new people about us who are supporting us. The tragedy still happened in the past. We're going to carry that grief. But you know what? There's solid ground under our feet again. Because I took the journey, and I trusted in the Lord, and I walked with him through it. And it's a new orientation. That's almost always how the Bible presents seasons of difficulty, that we're supposed to keep going out and coming in, looking to the Lord, experiencing the disorientation, holding fast to him, and knowing that he'll hold fast to us even when we're struggling, and coming to a place of a new orientation. It doesn't heal the struggles of the past, but we find I can have life and joy and goodness moving forward, because I've seen that the Lord is my rock. He is my fortress. He is my shield. All of this language from the Old Testament. Let's see how it turns out for them. Ruth 4. Let's see. I'm not sure I need to read all this. Let's read a little bit. It says, "Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by." All right, sweet. This is exactly the guy we needed to talk to. He just so happened to be coming by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And then Boaz sits down a bunch of elders, and he says to him, "Hey, here's the situation. Naomi's back. She's got some land that needs to be redeemed. You're the redeemer. Do you want to purchase the land?" And that guy goes, "Yeah, I do want to purchase that land. That's a great deal." And then Boaz kind of turns around and goes, "Well, okay. Just so you know, you'll also have to marry Ruth the Moabite and continue her husband's line through her as part of your redeeming responsibilities." And the guy goes, "Oh, huh. You know what? Now that I think about it, I can't redeem. Go ahead, Boaz. It's all yours, you know?" And so we don't really know what led to that. It could have just been the guy's life situation. Hey, I already got a wife. I'm not looking for all that drama, right? Or it could be there's kind of a racist element, racist in that day, different than it is in this day, but an element of those people I don't associate with. I'm not bringing that into my line, and I'm not bringing my genes into that and mixing it up, right? Like, we don't know what it is, but as soon as he said Ruth, and he makes sure to say the Moabite again, it's back in view. He says, "Ooh, yeah, I'm out." So Boaz says, "Great, okay. Well, then I will redeem it, and then we'll transact this in front of all these people through a strange ceremony involving someone stealing a sandal." I don't know. So pick up in verse 9. It said, "Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, 'You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon.'" Those are all the men, right? "Also Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." So that's everything we've talked about, right? I am going to do those three roles of the Redeemer. "Then all the people who were at the gate and the elder said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephratah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman.'" A couple things. I'm not going to have time to go into the Perez and Tamar and Judah saga, but that's in Genesis 38. The author seems to be wanting to draw our attention to that event and then to kind of read that alongside here and compare, but mostly contrast those scenarios to see kind of how things are working out differently when people are really acting worthily and godly. So that's a fun little read to do. That's one of those PG-13 moments of the Bible, just fair warning. But what you hear here in the language, I think this is really fascinating. In the language of these people who have discounted Ruth and Naomi absolutely since they came back, now this wonderful blessing comes upon their lips. And they say, "May she be like Rachel and Leah. These are the mothers of the patriarchs of Israel, who bore all the 12 children who would become the heads of the tribes of Israel." This is quite an adulation they pour out, and quite a blessing. And in the Old Testament, you see this a lot, where these blessings are not just kind of nice words, but there's almost a prophetic element to them often, where the blessing will be something that actually defines the existence of those people and defines their descendants after them in a lot of ways. You see that often in the Bible. So you almost see the Lord putting this blessing onto the lips of the gathered people to really draw attention to how significant this is. Let's go on. It says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception," honeymoon baby, "and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.' Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So a few things to just note here. Notice how it's Naomi who's in view for almost the entire end of this letter. Isn't that fascinating? Ruth had a child, and then the rest is to Naomi. They say, a child has been born to Naomi. And they say, Naomi is the one who's been blessed by the Lord in this way. And of course, all this is wrapped up in what we've already kind of keyed into, in the fact that the book of Ruth is, in large part, really a book about Naomi and how the Lord took Naomi from emptiness and bitterness to fullness and joy. Don't you see that when she has the baby and it lays in her lap, and this son is now a new son to her through this Redeemer contract? And not only is she full in that she has the provision of food and protection now, but she's full of just joy because the Lord has taken care of her and he's provided for her, and she is honored among all the people in the city as the blessed of the Lord. You see, when the Lord takes us on this journey, there's going to be times that look really scary. There's going to be times that we feel like the Lord is far from us. Feel the freedom to pray those things to the Lord. Lord, you feel far away. Do you hear me? We see that all the time in the Psalms. But don't lose hope. Use that as a time to press in. Use that as a time to press in and say, Lord, I feel disoriented now, but I'm holding fast to you in trust that you have a plan and that I will find orientation again. I might still feel the grief of the past. We all have a past, and we will carry those griefs. We are sinners, and we've been sinned against in 1,000 ways. We're going to carry that, but the Lord will bring us through seasons of tragedy, and he can bring us to a place where we realize, you know what? The rock is solid under my feet again. I know the Lord. I understand myself more. And I do have a fullness of joy, even with the grief there. And I know that I'm going to be all right. Not only am I going to be all right, there's a lot of life and joy left to give and live. We see that in the life of Naomi, and I think that's why it brings her into view here. It's the story of how God blessed Naomi through Ruth. You see, Ruth is shown as this person who gave up of herself for the sake of Naomi at every single step, is she not? She gave up the easy route of going back to her family. She put her life on the line to go and provide for Naomi in the fields. She gave up her maybe better future prospects, in the words of Boaz, to step into a marriage relationship with him for the sake of her mother. And to keep that in the line so that her first child would be the child of, in a significant sense, Naomi, as opposed to just the child of Ruth that she had with a husband. So that Naomi would come back from her place of emptiness and bitterness and would find joy and fullness again. So what we see is Ruth is almost presented as this Christ-like character in the letter. This one who gave up of herself so that the other could have fullness of life. We can tend to read the story of Ruth and know that she's in the line of David, which means then she's then in the promised line that would lead to Jesus. This is why Ruth is so significant in both Jewish and Christian history. Without Ruth, there is no David. With no David, there's no messianic line. Without a messianic line, there's no Jesus. Without Jesus, there's no church, right? And the author directs our attention to that. This is where David came from. And we say, why is it that this lowly Moabite woman, by the way, God himself doesn't speak kindly of Moabites in the law. So why is it that this is a story? What are we supposed to understand? We see that it's not incidental that Jesus comes from a line that Ruth is a part of, that Ruth is known as one of the mothers of Jesus. It's not incidental, it's very intentional. because Jesus would be the kind of person that Ruth is in its fullness for all of humanity, for all of the world. And isn't that what it's all about, right? As we started the service, we said God is seeking true worshipers, and that's the good news, is that eventually God would send Jesus, and then he would seek every single one of us, if we're Christians here today, and he would save us and redeem us so that we might know God and we might have fullness of life. And all that came from Jesus laying himself down completely on the cross so that we can have fullness of life. I see that Ruth gives a vision of what Jesus will be down the road. If you haven't walked in that good news, if you don't know what that means, fullness of life, and Jesus, let today be the day that you step into that and receive that. A couple things. I know it's a little late, but I just want to point out one thing here. Well, two things, sorry. The first one's fast. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Ruth is placed right after the book of Proverbs. In the last chapter of Proverbs is Proverbs 31. It's this interesting chapter where a mother is speaking to a son, and she says, son, let me tell you what a virtuous woman is and who to search for as a wife. And it's intentional that they place the book of Ruth right after the book of Proverbs and right after chapter 31 of Proverbs. If you read through chapter 31 of Proverbs, it's an interesting thing to do with Ruth and just say, how many of these phrases just speak almost directly of things that correlate with Ruth here. Ruth is presented as more Israelite than almost the entire Israelite community around her. She's the epitome of what it is to be a woman of God in so many ways. But the one thing I want to draw attention to is a thread through the letter, and that's God's providence in this. You know, we can look to Ruth and we can say, boy, yeah, Ruth, she had some gumption. You know, she really got up and did some things, and look how it turned out. I need to be more like Ruth. And we can miss seeing the obvious hand of the Lord that isn't so explicit in this letter as it is implicit, just clearly under the surface through a lot of happy coincidences that happen in the letter. So I'm just going to rip through those and make the point that this is God's having a heart for the seemingly insignificant, and when he goes to do a work in their life, they become utterly significant in the world. In chapter 1, God directed this Jewish family out of Jerusalem with a famine. And then he directed these men to stay there for a while so that they'd end up having to marry Moabite wives. And then he directs them back to Bethlehem. And then they came back to Bethlehem really conveniently right at the time of the barley harvest, right? And before that, God had attached Ruth's heart to Naomi against all expectation. But if they would have come at any other time of year, they would have really struggled to find food. This would have been a short story, right? Tragedy. But they came right at the time of barley harvest. There's food to go get. Then God directs Ruth to Boaz's field. Of all the possible fields she could have gone to, the language in chapter 2 says, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. How about that? And then right after that said, and then we see that God directs Boaz to go from Bethlehem to the field to check on his workers at this day, on this time. And it says, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. Hey, another convenience that he would encounter Ruth. We see that the Lord works uniquely on Boaz's heart to let him see her virtue and her worth in a way that really shouldn't have been expected. We see that in the language of Ruth. She said, how is it that I found such favor in your eyes since I'm a foreigner like this, right? God protects Ruth through Boaz. Naomi recognizes the hand of the Lord specifically at the end of chapter 2. In chapter 3, we talked about all the potentially disastrous ways that scenario could have happened when Ruth is going to the threshing floor and how God kind of expertly worked everything for the very perfect thing that could have happened, not only for her, but for Naomi and also for the entire history of the people of Israel and their Davidic line. In chapter 4, God brings the other kinsman redeemer to Boaz right when Boaz needed him to. And it says, behold, the redeemer came by in the text. It says, other ones, God directs this other possible redeemer away from Ruth and Naomi. It's not even explained why. Still seemed like a pretty good deal for him, but he directed his heart away from that so that Boaz could step in. God had provided Boaz the prosperity to be able to make this purchase at this time. That's a big deal. He had to have a financial output for it. God put that blessing on the lips of the town elders and leaders. We talked about that. Then God, it specifically says God gave a child. It said the Lord gave her conception. And then we see that God provides for all of Israel through Ruth by maintaining the chosen kingly messianic line. And we see that he provides for all of the people of God throughout all time, because this is where Jesus would come from. It's not a mistake that Ruth is so significant in history. It's because the Lord saw someone that the world would seem to think is insignificant, and he went and he chose her, and he brought her in, and he brought her to himself, and he says, as you follow me in faith, I can do significant things through you. And maybe you need to hear that today. Maybe some of you think, I'm not a very significant person. I'm just a mom, and I chase my kids around, and for some reason I always have peanut butter and jelly on some part of my body. And I just, my husband knows what I do in a day, but really no one else does. Maybe you think, I just work a job, it's kind of dead end. I don't even know what my company really does in the world that's significant. And I don't think there's any upward mobility for me. I just show up, and it brings in the bills. Or you might say, I'm in this church, and you say, man, these people who can play, these people who can speak, hey, they really got something. I'm not very significant. There's really not much for me to do around here. You need to hear that that's absolutely false. That is not the paradigm of how the Lord works. That's not how the Lord works. The Lord chose you. He called you. He brought you into this building today for a purpose. Maybe he's been working in your life for many, many years. It's not an accident. The hand of the Lord is not arbitrary. It's specific. He knows you, and he says, I can do significant things through you. Maybe something that can change the whole world. I know you're small hands, but maybe you can turn the wheels of the world. You need to know that. You need to know that this church has a way for you to do something significant in this church, for these people, in this city. Simple things that the Lord can do a lot through. 1 Corinthians 1:26, Paul says it like this. He says, consider your calling, brothers. He's saying this to all Christians. He said, not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. That's a little offensive, but okay. Not many were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. This is how God works. He takes people who maybe in the grand scheme of things in the world don't seem significant, and he says, watch while I'll do something significant in you. It is not insignificant that you show your kids a sacrificial love and point them to Jesus through simple acts of kindness and love every single day. That could be world-changing. It's world-changing for them. It is not insignificant that you love your spouse sacrificially day after day, even if no one else sees it. It's not insignificant that you show up and you work hard and you're just an example of someone with integrity and virtue in a world where it's so difficult to find those people, and you radiate the goodness and the wonder of Jesus' work in your life. It's not insignificant that you come here, you talk to people, you smile, you pray for them, you tell them that they're beloved of the Lord, and you serve in simple little ways. Smile at someone when they come in, hand some food to someone, help teach some kids the basics of the Bible. Through those simple little things, the Lord says, that's how I change the world. And here's the thing. It's because you say, obviously that was the Lord. I'm not so significant. He just did significant things through me. All glory be to God. And that's what the world needs to see, a big God who can do the impossible. So if you count yourself as significant today, don't do so. Gandalf says this. Try not to cross over. says, Saruman believes it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that's not what I found. I found it is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay. Just small acts of kindness and love. Small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk. Don't discount that. Seek the Lord and see what he does through you. But also in this summer where we're trying to look out a little bit more and say, who does God have a heart for that's in my sphere, in my life? Take this response time and think, who have I been just kind of looking over in my life? Who have I kind of discounted as kind of insignificant? Maybe it's just someone you don't consider much. Maybe it's someone you work with day after day. Maybe it's someone that just seems like a lost cause. Maybe it's someone that you just don't think have much to them. So you haven't reached out to engage them as a friend, and you definitely haven't reached out to engage them with the gospel. Ask the Lord to put someone on your mind, on your heart, that maybe you've been prone to look at as insignificant, and know that God has a heart for those who seem insignificant. And let's see what wonders the Lord does if we just take a step of faith and try to be God's instrument to bring someone from darkness to light, from death to life, and to change someone else's entire identity. Let's pray. Lord, we love you. We thank you for the book of Ruth. We thank you for your just tremendous work that we get to behold. We thank you for sustaining us through a long sermon and a big, book where we've covered a lot of ground. But God, we just thank you for you blessing us through it. Thank you for these people. I thank you for every single person who has walked in this building. God, I know that you have a heart for them. There's nothing insignificant about them. God, I pray that they turn to you and find joy in you today. Lord, if there's someone here who does feel like they're in a season of disorientation where they just can't seem to get their feet underneath them, the waves seem to be washing over, oh God, meet them with grace this morning. Be merciful, Lord. Be present. And God, give them courage and strength and a focus on you. Draw the eyes of their hearts upwards where they can find help from the Lord. You who made heaven and earth, you can speak things into existence that don't yet exist. God, you can work in the trials we have in our life. We want to know you. We want to see your glory and experience the fullness of joy that it is to be called your children. We ask you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.